Now we are going to deep delve into this situation. Joining us live from Kyiv, Ukraine is political analyst John Kavlich. John, thank you so much for joining us here on Anews once again. It's always a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Well, we have been talking about wars with you a lot, and two of the wars that we have been talking about nowadays is Iran war, of course, but we have been talking about Ukraine war for a while as well. You are in Ukraine right now, and I know that you have like a wide knowledge on the Ukraine war. So what would you say about the dynamics of these two wars reflecting in the world? Are they the same? Are they different? Are their outcomes going to be likely to one another? What is your take on that?
Elif, it's really it's a dynamic question because, in essence, the basis of the two wars include religion. In the case of Russia and Ukraine, the role of the Church, the Orthodox Church, as the Russian Federation Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Federation Orthodox Church, and they were one, they've now split. But the context of the war does have faith, and President Putin has talked about that. And then you go to Iran, and I never thought in the 21st century that I'd be saying this, but there is a holy war that is permeating the Middle East and enveloping other countries. And what I mean by that is we have Israel and the United States, Christian or Jewish Christian, attacking a Muslim country, Iran. And in Iran, then you have Shia and Sunni Muslims. So you have a differentiation within the faith. And you have now 15 or so countries, all Muslim majority, that have now been attacked by Iran. And it's pretty much a holy war that is just sort of the 21st century version. But generally, the expectation on the Holy War was that it would maybe be, Israel and Iran, so Jewish and Muslim, or Muslim on Muslim, Shia versus Sunni. But here we've got, the three religions that are all going at it.
Well, yes, the religion itself is the core situation in all of the wars, and it's really says something to us. But when we talk about the energy, for example, there are also really likely situations that is unfolding, isn't it? We were talking about when Russia and Ukraine war has started, we were talking about the Russian gas. Now we are talking about the Strait of Hormuz and the oil and everything. Do you think that the energy dynamics are going to be same between the two wars before we even deep delve into the energy situation?
Well, on Russia-Ukraine, there has been a trajectory toward ending the military component of the conflict, leaving all the other issues aside. But there was a trajectory that was planning to get there this year, and it's still doable. But then Iran interrupted, and the Ukrainian government is apoplectic because it, again, as when Gaza started, it pushed Ukraine off the front pages. Changes in Syria pushed Ukraine off the front pages. Natural disasters push Ukraine off the front pages, and they do not like being off the front page, legitimately, and also their ego. And now they've been pushed down again, and you have their sort of the worst nightmare of it is not only are people not necessarily talking about Ukraine, but the country that attacked Ukraine, Russia, now courtesy of both what Israel started with Iran in terms of then the disruption of energy supplies and price increases, and then the U.S. adding to that, and now the U.S. giving a waiver for basically vessels that already had, as of March the 12th, if they had oil in them and they were floating around the world, then Russia could now sell them. So India is stocking up, everybody's stocking up now on all this oil. And so Russia's making more money. It'll be relatively short term, but still, a billion here, a billion there enables them to keep the war going and keep hitting and harming Ukraine. And then you turn to Iran, where it's remarkable that the other day, or actually yesterday, President Trump was talking about how he reached out to some countries to help in the Strait of Hormuz to basically either escort tankers or just try to keep the Iranians busy. And he didn't get a lot of takers. And then he made this comment, and he said that, if I don't get help, this will be bad for NATO. And that was so telling, because what I'm wondering, and I've heard from at least two people in his little MAGA Mar-a-Lago, his club in Florida world, that there's been a suggestion to him that he should invoke Article 5, which is a collective defense article in NATO. And basically what it means is that an attack, it's presented as an attack on one as an attack on all. But really what it is someone says, I need your help, and then all the countries decide what they want to do. But they're not obligated to fight. They're obligated to decide what they want to do. And there's a concern now that he may do that, knowing that there's not going to be any help, and then that helps him further destroy what is NATO.
Well, that is a point that we are talking about right now. Even it starts off as destroying NATO, and then does that mean that we are slowly but surely heading towards a new kind of structure in the world, or do you think that is this some of the things that is going to come and die down in the future?
Well, no, we have the existing structures have been realigned. It's almost as though they're still there, but the formulas that created them, Donald Trump beginning in his first term and now in an accelerated pace in his second term, has firmly disrupted the European Union, for example. And how did he do that? One, he did it with his trade negotiations, because basically pitting all 27 against one another. And then secondly, it was Russia-Ukraine war, by saying, we're no longer going to be doing this on the U.S. taxpayer, but we're welcome, we'll sell you stuff. And that has forced a reckoning in the European Union that they never expected. And so he's disrupted the European Union. NATO, the same thing. From the U.S. perspective, we're not going to be paying everything, supporting everything. NATO has to be on its own. And President Trump looks at NATO and goes, really, we've got 3,000 miles of water between us and Europe. So isn't it really not North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Isn't it the European Treaty Organization? So we force them to realign, spend more money, take on more responsibility. And so the existing organizations are thus far intact, but he has completely redesigned what they were 4 years ago or 8 years ago, what they were doing and how they were operating. And he's got a little less than 3 years to go. And I think we're going to continue to see World Trade Organization, the United Nations, which he's already started, and he generally uses money, budgets to try to coerce people. He's got some projects left to do.
That is indeed the situation. Now let's deep delve into the other situation as well, because as you know, President Donald Trump has actually made a call on the 7 nations on the Hormuz, and they were talking about, his statements were quite intense, let me put it in that way. And also, what is your take on his statements? Let's talk about his statements, and let's talk about afterwards, let's talk about what is going on with the Hormuz as well.
Well, he's increasingly hostile toward everybody. And he's, the word that is often used to describe him is, he's full of grievances. And he's constantly, if he doesn't have a grievance, he'll come up with one. And then if he's got one and he uses it, he'll try to up that and make it even more of a grievance. And he's in right now with Cuba, for example, the administration reached out to some companies and said, hey, will you come on board and support what we're trying to do now in Cuba and changing the government or changing the behavior of the government, changing the economy. And the companies said, look, we understand what you're doing and we actually support what you're trying to do, but no way are we going to go public because at breakfast you can support us and by lunch you're going to be condemning us. So we're scared to death. And that's basically what heads of state and heads of government are finding, that Keir Starmer of the UK, he's no Winston Churchill. President Trump, there's this whole testosterone thing going on with him and President Macron of France. He'll be with President Macron in June for the G7. And this is going to be actually, we've got the G7 in June, NATO Leaders Summit in July, hosted by President Erdogan in Turkiye. These two events we're rolling toward a grieve fest, where this is potentially just going to be ugly because he's just going to go around the room and, using French, j'accuse, j'accuse, j'accuse. It's going to be, unless something great happens in Iran, which I don't think too many people are optimistic about, in terms of, he's already said, I've obliterated Iran. Well, generally, if someone says they've obliterated something, you can go home. It's over, it's finished. But he keeps obliterating every day. So he's redefining the terms. He's getting more angry because it's not finishing the way he wants. And now some European Union or European leaders, NATO, European Union, are standing up to him saying, no, it's this, you started this war. This isn't our war. And so that's where I cycle back. We may see him test Article 5 of NATO Charter.
Well, that is a high. Number one of the problems right now we are facing is just testing the Article 5 in NATO Charter. So do you think that it is really going to take on? Do you think that it is going to go as far as just NATO against Iran situation? Do you think that the United States is going to be able to drag this conflict into that situation? And if they do, what should we expect?
I think that, Mark Rutte, who's the Director General of NATO, last year he made that famous statement about calling President Trump daddy. And sometimes daddy has to, corral the children, which was an appalling statement, it's cringeworthy. But NATO leadership are going to try to do everything they can to stay out of this. And they've already put out there, we are a defensive organization. We're not offensive. Well, then how do you square that with Ukraine? Offense or defense? And so I think that while NATO as an entity is not going to, do what they did in, Bosnia or, back then and during the end of the Clinton administration, but I think it's possible some NATO members will be coerced, but that NATO itself will really try to say, this is not NATO versus Iran. This is not NATO versus Islam. This is not NATO versus Muslims, because Europe has so much more assimilation with the Muslim community than we do in the United States. And that's a concern as well to political leadership is, do we really want to be side by side with President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is now reinvading Lebanon, He is expanding territory in Syria. He led the bombing and continues to lead the bombing of Iran. Is this our alliance? You know, and potentially Germany, especially with you know, a large Muslim community, a large Turkish community, and with that, do we want to potentially anger these people? We had last week a situation in the United States where a gentleman rammed his car into a synagogue because his family members, reportedly, his family members have been killed by Israel and Lebanon. So NATO, I think, is going to try to do everything they can to not do anything. But Donald Trump is going to make it painful for them. And thus far, President Trump has left one NATO member, really interestingly, alone, President Erdogan.
It is, indeed. It is. Well, when we do all of these comparisons, I know that we're beating around the bush for obvious reasons, that we hope that it doesn't go like this, but there are so many situations that feels like it is going to go downhill. So when you consider the Strait of Hormuz, let's just focus on that for a second. We know that it is a strategy from Iran's side that they are trying to avoid what is happening to them. But we also know that the barrel prices just went sky high, and there are just so many responses that is coming from the European Union and United Kingdom. Do you think that under these circumstances, the situation with Strait of Hormuz is sustainable, or do you think that the third parties are going to interfere and try to do something about it?
Well, we all know the trajectory of this, and the trajectory is that there will be an end. The Iranian government, the military, eventually they will not have a response, a military response, because they're using up everything that they're sending out, or they're using it to protect themselves from Israel and the United States. But eventually, they're not going to be able to have the tools, the military tools, to sustain a constriction or a blockade, whatever we want to call it, but to prevent normal. And so, with that, as we know this is going to slide down, the challenge, as you talked about, is how long does that take, and what's the financial price that everyone's going to pay for it? And we then switch back, ironically, to Russia-Ukraine war. In 2022, on 24th of February 2022, Russia attacks. Very quickly, European Union and the United States and other countries get together and they say, we have to stop purchasing oil and gas or energy products from Russia as best we can, as fast as we can, to punish them. But we know doing that, prices are going to go up, and our voters and our taxpayers are not going to be happy. But this is the one time where political leadership, we need to say to our constituents, the people that pay us, that voted for us, that put us in office, we need to say, this is us being leaders. It's going to be painful, but it's the right thing to do. And they did it for the most part. Here we are now where it's President Trump had made that statement. Oil prices are going to go up, but it's worth the price. And that's where you get a question, because is it worth the price? And then what is the price it's worth? And if you've got a lot of money, well, then I'm elastic. I don't care whether gasoline at the pump goes up 20, 30, 50, or doubles. I've got money, so I don't care. But then you've got the people living paycheck to paycheck, and they do care. And then it's not just gasoline. It's natural gas, it's oil products, it's refined products, it's fertilizers. Most people don't think about it, but that also transit through the Strait of Hormuz, a lot of it, like 40% of it. And so then it becomes a matter of how much elasticity do political leaders think their voters and their taxpayers have? thus far, it's pretty elastic. They announced they were going to release the strategic petroleum reserves, 400 million barrels, whatever. That's not really going to matter for 4 months because it's got to get into the system. But there is something they could all do today, and that is price controls. But they've chosen not to do it, which I find interesting, and I don't really know why. But for an example, when you or I go to a gas station, if we went to a gas station on the 28th of February, the day of the attack, and we put gas in our car, that gas was sitting in an underground tank at the gas station that gets filled up every week, 2 weeks, every 30 days. They're huge tanks, 10, 20, 50,000 gallon tanks. Some of them have two of them. Well, that gas was purchased quite a while ago, and the refinery refined it quite a while ago, and it came out of the ground even further. Well, then 28th February comes along, the attack, and on March the 1st, you start seeing gasoline prices at the pump start going up. Well, the gas that they're selling, they didn't pay any more for that. And so this is sort of a scam. But politicians, if they wanted to, could say, whatever the price was on the 28th of February, it's staying that way until you prove to us, gas stations primarily, that you now have to buy new gas. But no one's doing that yet.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sparing your time and answering my questions. And I hope that the situation just gets resolved anytime soon. And then we're hoping, but it's probably not looking good for us. But
yeah, I wish I could be, really confident, but, I'll leave with, then we have our Secretary of Defense, War Hegseth, reading scripture at his press conferences and then saying to the media they need to be patriotic. So there's just so much to this that I think it's going to be hard to wind down from it. And what's sad about it is that every day this goes on, people die, there's destruction, and people get poorer because they're paying more for whatever they're using.
that is quite true. Before we wrap up, I know your statement just made me wonder. The statements that is coming from the head of the State Department and the defense minister and everything, you said that they're saying that you should be more patriotic, and then their take on the United States inner politics is so different than the previous politics. So how it is reflecting on the U.S. right now?
Last week when Pete Hegseth made that statement, he enveloped it all by all of the scripture, and this is something that he started to do since the war, where it's incredibly religious context to everything he says, prayers, and I'm responsible to a higher authority in that. And then he made this remark because he was saying, CNN and Al Jazeera and New York Times and Washington Post, they were reporting, and it makes the president look bad, and they should be more patriotic in their reporting. It was stunning, because we don't do that, and 200. This is our 250th year. One of the reasons why we exist is because we didn't want that. So I think it's troubling for us, and I think it's going to be consequential as we get to the midterm elections in November. But more importantly, it's adding to the separation of people in our country, and then not even getting into the example that we're setting for children when children are trying to figure out what's going on with you people. You're adults, and you people are really acting like crazy people.
Obviously, it is interesting, isn't it? Because yes, the literal foundation of the United States of America was based because people did not want to rely on the certain beliefs in that part of the world. Now we are talking about a head of state and head of governments and the state departments and the defense departments ministers are talking about how they are working for God. And this is yet another religious war. In the midterms, does it going to be affecting the United States for better or worse, in your opinion?
It's going to play into effect. Again, we're March 17th, so November is a long way away, and this, the Iranian government, they could Israel and the U.S. could end up doing something, and the Iranian government does change, and then President Trump rolls into the G7 and rolls into NATO and says, you people didn't do anything for me. I did it for you. I did it for everybody. I was always right. You were always wrong. And then the Republicans may do well and prices will come down. But if it's still unsettled and the narrative is, this is God's war. I am the vessel of the Lord Almighty, and the Lord Almighty has said Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, and they have to go. And my partner is Benjamin Netanyahu of the state of Israel. So there we are. This is I'm doing the work of the Lord, and and then you look at billion plus Muslims, followers of Islam, and they're like, wait a minute, haven't you people for 60, 100 years, whenever we talk about our faith, when we talk about the importance of our faith, we talk about Allah, we talk about Inshallah, God willing, and you mock us, and you say that we're terrorists, and you say that we're dangerous, and you want to deport us. But now you've got your own little holy war, and we're all supposed to sign up for it. So again, it all depends on how this plays out eventually. And, regime change in Iran, okay, they got rid of the head guy. Now we've got the son. They get rid of him, and will there be someone else? But when it's over, what does it look like? And Donald Trump, the one thing we know is that his definition of finished, his definition of complete, his definition of it's over, his definition of obliterated, his definition of they desperately want a deal, his definition of a deal, all of it is fluid, and it changes hour to hour. So I think that's what we're in for these next months. And I'm guessing the Iranians are probably sitting in Tehran going, what does he want? And how can we give him what we want if we're not certain that what he says he wants in the morning is what he's going to want by lunchtime? So I think this is going to take a while.
It probably will. And it is something that shouldn't take a while, but it is probably going to take a while. And it is going to have a hold on the world history for even longer than that.
Yeah, Elif, there's so many interests now that want to keep this going for their own interests. And in Russia-Ukraine war, same thing. Sort of the closer we get to a resolution, the further away we become, because all of a sudden people start saying, well, oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting that, or I want to discuss that. And so rather than have a funnel where we go from a lot of issues to the minimum that we need to discuss, they want to go the other way. And that's sort of what I'm fearing is going to happen, that as we start getting closer, then a lot of interests pop up saying, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe we want to add this and we want to add that. And then how do we actually come to a conclusion, and what is a conclusion? and that's if you're, and we've talked about this, the person that's probably getting the least amount of sleep is President Erdogan, because he's got to tee up in July 32 heads of state and heads of government watching Russia, Ukraine, watching Syria, watching Iran, and basically like a raging bull of Donald Trump that is going to be just with big horns, just trying to hit everybody. And Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain is probably going to be target number one, because President Trump's not happy with him about NATO spending, not happy with him about supporting what he's doing. And so, yeah, President Erdogan, he's a great conductor. This time he's going to have an orchestra where no one can read the music, but they've all got instruments. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a really, really interesting 2 days.
Yes, it will. And it's really mesmerizing to the point that there were times in the world history, like really close history, that we just didn't listen to the sound of the summits that much if it didn't relate to us. Like as journalists or analysts, we of course did listen, but I'm talking about the mere normal people. But this time, everyone is going to try to listen to the music, and we don't know if there will be any.
Yeah, or, as I said, they're all going to have instruments. None of them are going to have music. So there's going to be a lot of noise. I don't know what it's going to sound like, but there is going to be noise. And, this is going to, well, we've, over the years, we've always, talked about the, President Erdogan's, the coffee, tea, and cookie diplomacy on the sofas. This may well be his most challenging moment of global diplomacy, simply because there's so much happening. It involves NATO, and President Trump is collectively a part of all of this, and he's not happy with anybody. And so I think they're all going to be, all the other 30 members are going to be looking to President Erdogan as the host. And they're basically, I think quietly, they're going to be saying to President Erdogan, for God's sakes, do whatever you can, but keep him calm. But just for God's sakes, help us. And if anyone can do it, you got to have gravitas. And Mark Rutte will be there, the director, Secretary General. But yeah, this is going to be really interesting to see how President Erdogan manages this event. But he's doing it on home court. He's got home court advantage. It's at the presidential complex in Ankara. So he's having home court advantage is really important, whether you're a baseball team or you're a football team or whatever, basketball. He's got total home field advantage. That's going to help him. And he's got an amazing complex that President Trump is just going to look around and say, I want one of these, I want one of those. So he's got the tools. Good
luck with new adjustments in Washington and the White House at first. And then second, let's hope that we do not end up with the hearing impairments after the NATO summit. And thank you, as always, very much. It was a really diverse conversation. Thank you so much for keeping up with the questions. I know that they were just all around. And it's always a pleasure to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you.